Gospel is early Christian writings that tell about the life and teachings of Jesus Christ. The earliest known gospel, or written gospel, was Mark, which is what we'll be studying today. And it uses the definition uses the word evangelion, which was a Greek word which meant good news. It describes the message. Also, as the gospel came to be spread throughout the world, England had a word, Godspell, and that was an Old English word, and it also means good news. Again, in review, the basic major languages of the day and the time were Aramaic, Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. And the other thing that is of concern and we need to be aware of is that in the beginning, when they wrote the Gospels, or when they began to write about the Bible and to put the Bible together, there were hundreds of different books of the Bible. And so all of the religious people got together for two councils. It was we call them the Nicene Councils. The first one was the Council of Nicaea, and it was held in Nicaea, which today is known as Iznik in northwest Turkey. The Roman Emperor Constantine, who made Christianity the religion of the Roman Empire, he called this first council in 325 AD, and it was to settle a dispute that was caused by there was a priest named Arian who had a view about the Trinity, which differed from what other people had, and so they wanted to bring all the religious leaders and people together to settle a few things. Arius was the priest at Alexandria, and we're going to see in our lesson today that Mark, that was the church he established, the church in Alexandria, in Alexandria, Egypt. He believed that Jesus Christ was not the same essence or substance as God. The council adopted the so-called Nicene Creed, which declared that God and Jesus Christ, as God, were of the same essence. It also fixed the time for observing Easter, because different sects of Christianity were celebrating it at different times. The second council was called by the Empress Irene and who was from the Byzantine Empire, and her son was Constantine, and they called that at 787 AD. And that was called because, again, all the great religious leaders of the day and time, that was called because Emperor Leo, who was Irene's husband, he had died, but he had forbidden the use of images for any religious purpose. Irene and Constantine called the council because of the opposition to Leo's decree. And at this council, the second council of Nicene, they canceled Leo's decree and established principles by which govern the veneration or honoring of images. And in doing this, I was really surprised that there wasn't a whole lot more on Mark. But there seems to be, his story seems to be a little haphazard. And there are different beliefs of, or different versions of what happened with him and how things went with him. But I just want to point out again, as I did from the map, as I said, Rome had become the superpower of the known world. So basically from here, all of Africa, that was all part of Rome. And you can see Rome, this is Italy, the little loop. Rome was the capital city of Italy. So from that place there, Rome ruled all these places. This is known as the Western Mediterranean, and this was the Eastern. And what happened, when I was saying the Byzantine Empire, what had happened was when Alexander the Great, who was a great conqueror, a Roman general conqueror, he was the man who had controlled more land space than any other person that lived as an emperor. And he, because he liked living in the western part of the empire, he tried to change everything from Rome to Constantinople. And he established, for a few years, he had established Constantinople, which was named after Constantine. Alexandria, which is the capital of Egypt, was named after Alexander the Great. But he wanted the capital to be in Constantinople. So there was a big breakup and big divide with the Romans as to whether Rome would remain the capital or not. In the meantime, this is where I want to start with the introduction to Mark. Why do we read Mark? What is it that Mark brings to the table? And why is he one of the Gospels? Well, if you, all news radio stations and cable news channels give you highlights of all the news in the world in 30 minutes or less. Well, the Gospel of Mark follows a similar fast-paced approach while introducing Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Readers see highlights of the ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Coming out of obscurity, this unique God-man preaches, performs miracles, and encounters both great popularity and deadly opposition. It's the greatest news story of all time. The book of Mark was written by Mark. He's also known by the name of John Mark. He was the son of a Jerusalem widow whose home was a meeting place for early believers. We'll look at that in Acts 12:12. Mark mostly recorded the events as he heard them firsthand from the disciple Peter. So Mark was really an understudy of Peter. He also interpreted for Peter, because Peter didn't speak Greek fluently, and Mark did. Now, Paul, you recall, was converted on the road to Damascus. He was known as Saul. But Paul was a great friend of Mark. He was actually Paul was Mark's father's brother, so he was his uncle. And he made sure that Mark got a good education and was well trained. Also, Mark was able to travel with Paul and to observe firsthand the things that were happening as the church grew and became larger. It was written about 50 AD, and well, that's the earliest that they think it was written. It was written either between 50 AD and between around 65. So around 65 is what is basically known as when his book was written. It was the first one written. He was the first one to write a book of the Bible. And that was also closer to the time that Peter was executed, but before Jerusalem was destroyed by the Roman armies in AD 70. The book is a distinctly non-Jewish flavor. So remember I said that Matthew was written towards the Jews. Well, this is more or less written towards the Gentiles, which we are a part of. Now, the Roman Empire, which, as I said, was a dominant world power, they had begun to persecute Christians. Mark wanted to encourage suffering believers. He showed Jesus as a suffering servant who came to die. He also portrayed him as a savior of the entire world, including Romans as well as Jews. Now, one of the things to look for in Mark is the humanity of Jesus, who was both the Son of God and the Son of Man. Watch for the emotional impact of this action-packed gospel. And more than 40% of Mark focuses on the suffering and sacrifice of Christ's final week on earth. So that kind of sets the stage for what Mark was all about, what Mark was teaching and preaching. The thing about Rome and the persecution at that time, you may or may not know that Nero was the emperor of Rome at that time. And Nero had a very progressive building projects. He wanted, his name on a lot of things, and what he had done was overtax the people, and they couldn't really afford to his building program. So what he did was deflected the attention of the people, very much like what's going on today with all the politics, and they're not really talking about what's going on. They're deflecting it. Well, he deflected it onto the Christians. In fact, he was the one who gave Christians their name. And the word Christian was meant to be a put down. If you were a Christian, what it meant was little Christ. And so if you were called a little Christ, then it was a put down from the major people. So when he persecuted them and put them down, there was a fire that got started, and it burned over 50% of Rome. Well, he blamed the fire on the Christians. And so that made the people very much angry at the Christians. So that's where you have you hear your stories about the Christians being put into the Colosseum and lions eating them, and they're fighting to the death and stuff like that. That was Nero was behind a lot of that. Yes.
Explain what deflected means.
If I ask you a direct question, like what is your name, and you start talking about all kind of other stuff except for answering that question.
That's for everybody. That's a big word.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry if I do that sometimes. Well, like I said, it was tough to get a handle on Mark because some of the things that I came across and I'm not so sure about, and like I said, I depend on these researchers who have dedicated their lives to looking into these things. But there's a story that Mark was a servant at the wedding in Cana when Jesus did his first miracle. There's a story that Mark was with Paul and Barnabas, and we're going to look at that on their missionary trips in Acts. Again, the story about Mark being not mentor, but Paul being Mark's mentor and getting him an education and teaching him. But also the breakup. If you remember the story in Acts where Paul and Barnabas, they split, and Mark went with Barnabas. Now, as the story progresses of Mark's life, he founded the churches, the Christian churches in Egypt. There was just church after church after church. The most important one, or the biggest one, the first one he founded, was the church at Alexandria. And Alexandria was the capital of Egypt. And now, here too is some more history. If you remember in the Old Testament, the Jews were freed from Egypt. Now this is hundreds of years later, and here is Mark establishing a Christian church in the capital, at that time the capital, because Alexander the Great made it the capital of Alexandria. What happened though was the language of the people was called Coptic. So the church became a Coptic church. Now, like I said, that's just the language. I don't know if you all have ever seen pictures of the Eastern Orthodox churches. The Eastern Orthodox churches Rome was where Christianity spread from. So the Roman Catholic Church was established. And the Roman Catholic Church was established with Peter as the head, or as the Pope. Peter's remains are in St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. And from that church, all the other churches in the Roman Empire got their start. So now this Coptic church kind of broke away from Rome. There was a Coptic Orthodox Church and the Northeast Church of Africa. Those were the three big churches, and they belonged to a group that was called the Oriental Orthodox Family of Churches. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. When you say Orthodox, what does that really mean?
Good question. They accept the basic tenets or basic doctrines, which is that Jesus Christ was the Son of God, that Jesus Christ was also human, that Jesus came to the earth for man's salvation and for us to be reconciled with God, that he came and was crucified, resurrected, and rose into heaven. Those are the main basic Orthodox things. The difference about this church, as I said, it's in the far west, way away from Rome. And they also attended the Nicene councils. Well, they broke away from the Roman Catholic Church. And what I was trying to get at was, if you've seen the Eastern Orthodox churches, they do the same thing the Catholic churches do, pretty much. They have the mace and the sprinkle to baptize, but they wear black. So if you've ever seen those priests in the black, and sometimes when Easter and Passover and all that is going on, you'll often see, if they're showing something in Jerusalem, it shows all the different churches that come there to celebrate Christ's burial, crucifixion, and resurrection. And that's the church that Mark is credited for founding.
So you got the Orthodox?
Well,
Go ahead.
I live next to a synagogue, and I just remember in New York, they had the Orthodox Jews. So I was always taught that in Judaism, Jewish religion, they don't believe in Jesus being the Son of God. So when I hear Orthodox Jews, you don't believe in Jesus Christ, or you may believe in the person, but not the role that he played in our lives. But an Orthodox Catholic, I've never heard of before. Like, so
It's not Catholic. It's Coptic, C-O-P-T-I-C. And Orthodox, that's the other thing about Orthodox. In the Catholic Church, it means what I was talking about. In the Jewish, Orthodox is a different thing.
okay. Okay.
So your
I get that.
different religions, yeah.
Okay. Like there's 3 different ways to say there.
Oh, yeah.
Different ways.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, that's why I said this was so hard to get a handle on Mark, because it seemed like he was such a, not shadowy figure, but he wasn't so way out front. But he was educated, so he was able to put put things down in writing, so that people could follow it. And it's been passed down. Wait till you hear about his death. Okay, I'm getting way ahead of myself here. Mark opens up with the story of John the Baptist. And then he talks about Jesus' baptism and temptation. And he also talks about the calling of his first disciples. And I mentioned this earlier, or not today, but in the yesterday, or last week's session about Matthew, about how sometimes the details differ from one gospel account to another. And what I want to say here is that Mark omits many details that Matthew and Luke include in their accounts of Jesus' temptation. Just as various witnesses have individual perspectives on the event, the gospel writers draw on their own backgrounds and write down their own viewpoint from their particular audience. Of greater concern than the amount of coverage are the apparent discrepancies in the accounts themselves. For instance, Matthew and Luke seem to rearrange the sequence of these events. Matthew says Jesus was tempted, 1, to turn stones into bread, 2, to leap from the temple, and 3, to worship the devil so all the kingdoms of the world would be given to him. Luke changes the order of the second and third temptations. Ancient cultures do not feel compelled to relate events in chronological sequence. Some think Matthew may have listed the temptations in chronological order, while Luke listed them in order of significance. Though the details vary according to individual gospel writers, the essence of the information is consistent. There is no real contradiction between these accounts. So that kind of lets us know, or gives us a little insight on, one, like I said, Matthew was written to the Jewish people, the Greek Jews, the Hellenistic Jews, and Mark is written to the Gentiles, or it's slanted towards the Gentiles. And that was in large part due to exactly what that just said, that Mark was exposed to Paul and his teachings, and Peter also and their teachings to the Gentiles. Because if you remember, the Jews refused to accept, as you said, that Jesus was the Messiah, that he had come. And so the Christian religion grafted the Gentiles in, and so they taught to the Gentiles. But they also, as I said, you go first to the Jews and then to the Gentiles. So anytime the preachers, the apostles came into town, they went to the synagogue first, and then they went out and taught to the people. Now, one of the other things that they say about Mark is that, and this has been verified by practically every one of the sources I looked at, is that Mark's mother's house was the house where the Christians went to, early Christians went to after Jesus passed. That is also the same house that at the day of Pentecost, that's the house that they were in. So that was a neat little thing that I hadn't heard anything about. So I thought that was a good point with Mark. Then it goes, and then Mark tells other of the same similar stories to what Matthew has in it. He talks a little bit about fasting. He talks about the Sabbath, and also he notes that Jesus calls himself the Son of Man. In Mark 2:10, let's see, that is where we would find that, and that it says, "But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins," he said to the paralytic. "I tell you, get up and take your mat and go home." 12, he got up, took his mat, and walked out in full view of them all. This amazed everyone, and they praised God, saying, "We have never seen anything like this." Well, I also mentioned that fact in last week too, about Son of Man and Son of God. Jesus revealed and concealed himself by using this somewhat mysterious phrase. He was clearly human, but he was divine as well. His ministry progressively revealed this fact. To those who would oppose him, he chose to conceal his identity. To those who would accept him as the Messiah, destined to give his life for humanity, the term revealed his identity. Son of Man is used 14 times in Mark, and was Jesus' favorite term for himself. It describes the servant role he willingly assumed. Sometimes the term is used to describe his divine authority, his sacrificial role, and his future glory when he returns. By taking on this title in Mark 13:26 and 14:62, Jesus established himself as the fulfillment of the heavenly authority figure of Daniel 7, who was granted the right to come to earth, rule, and judge on behalf of God. The term blends the heavenly and earthly aspects of Christ. Because of his divine nature, God grants authority to Jesus to forgive sins. Because of his earthly purpose to be a ransom for many, he must suffer, be rejected, betrayed, and killed, finally to rise again. While others may not have immediately grasped what Jesus meant by this title, Jesus used it to claim authority, demonstrate power, and assume responsibilities no other man could. And the other point that I guess I should bring up now is that Jesus knew the appropriate time that he would be killed, and he knew when his ministry would begin. He did not want the Romans and the Jews from the Sanhedrin to. He did not want to be arrested and killed before that time. There was a timing for that. So in many instances, he would heal people, or he would do a miracle, and he would tell them to go, but don't say anything to anybody. As a matter of fact, in Matthew, that instance there with the gentleman with the mat, he told him not to say anything. One of the famous, I guess you could say quotes. And before I go on, the parables are also here. In the parables I mentioned in Matthew, similar parables, some of them are the same. The majority of these accounts have practically the same thing. Most of them are Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I don't remember the count, but I'll have it by the time we get to John, of how many of them were Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, where all of them were in the same. But the majority of them were Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But he spoke in parables, and that was another way that Jesus wasn't being very overt with what he was saying. Many times the disciples didn't understand what it was he was saying, and they would ask him because they traveled with him when he would present something in a parable. They would later, when they were together sitting around the campfire, ask him what the parable meant. He would break it down and explain it to them. But that's also part of why they didn't understand that he was going to die. I mean, he told them on several occasions that you tear down this temple and in 3 days it will be rebuilt again. Well, that was the death, crucifixion, and resurrection. They didn't quite get that. On other occasions, he told them that he would be killed, crucified, and that he would be resurrected, and they didn't believe it. So it was a mystery to his disciples also. And here, this is a good example of him presenting a parable and then explaining it to the disciples later. And then that's the parable of the sower. It's one of my favorite ones, as a matter of fact. It's Mark 4. Verse 1. Again, Jesus began to teach by the lake. The crowd that gathered around him was so large that he got into a boat and sat in it out on the lake, while all the people were along the shore at the water's edge.
Let me, Doctor.
Yes.
He's reading from the NIV. You
Yes.
may have the King James, and it may sound a little bit different, but it's the same. What is that? King James.
Okay. Have you got Mark?
Yes.
Okay. Mark chapter 4, and let's see. Let's go ahead and start. Verse
He
1.
he says the verse that he's reading so you can keep up with him in a different translation. He'll say 1 and he'll read so that you know that he's in verse 1. He'll say 2 when you read 2 so that you'll know, because there's so many different Bible translations now that when you're reading from, and I'm going to just stop and explain that, when you're reading from the pulpit or Bible study, that person that's reading may have one translation, but you might have 5 different ones in your audience. So I always teach them to say the verse before they start reading, and that way, whoever's out there, you know, tell me he's reading verse 1. It's a little bit different, but it's the same. That's why we go through the number thing. Okay, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Okay, verse 1. Again, Jesus began to teach by the lake. The crowd that gathered around him was so large that he got into a boat and sat in it out on the lake, while all the people were along the shore at the water's edge. 2. He taught them many things by parables, and in his teaching said, 3. Listen, a farmer went out to sow his seed. 4. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. 5. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. 6. When the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. 7. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants, so that they did not bear grain. 8. Still other seed fell on good soil. It came up, grew, and produced a crop, multiplying 30, 60, or even 100 times. 9. Then Jesus said, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. 10. When he was alone, the 12 and the others around him asked him about the parable. 11. He told them, the secret of the kingdom of God has been given to you, but to those on the outside, everything is said in parables. 12. So that they may be ever seeing but never perceiving, and ever hearing but never understanding. Otherwise they might turn and be forgiven. 13. Then Jesus said to them, don't you understand this parable? How then will you understand any parable? 14. The farmer sows the word. 15. Some people are like seed along the path where the word is sown. As soon as they hear it, Satan comes and takes away the word that was sown in them. 16. Others, like seed sown on rocky places, hear the word and at once receive it with joy. 17. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. 18. Still others, like seed sown among thorns, hear the word. 19. But the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desires for other things come in and choke the word, making it unfruitful. 20. Others, like seed sown on good soil, hear the word, accept it, and produce a crop, 30, 60, or even 100 times what was sown. So here we see the example of the parable being told, and then Jesus breaking it down for the disciples. You look puzzled.
I am.
Ask away, that's what we're doing.
What I understood, because yes, there's a complete different wording from what I'm reading from what you're reading.
Mm-hmm.
So, please forgive me if I'm wrong. From what I read, this is the message. If you understand what I'm saying, it's because you're with God or you're with me. If you don't understand the message, it's spoken in code. So some of you can understand it, but since you're not a true believer, it's not gonna help you. So when he said, when you read 12, to me it says that seeing that may see and not perceive, that hearing they may not hear and not understand, lest at any time they should be converted, and their sins should be forgiven. Forgive that.
called the Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin is made up of Pharisees and Sadducees. The basic difference with them is Pharisees believe in resurrection, the Sadducees don't. The Pharisees they rule by the law. In other words, the law is a thing that they go by. So when any issues and things come up with the Jewish people, they bring them before the Sanhedrin. The Pharisees are the ones who are strictly law. The Sadducees are not so much strictly law, and they don't believe in the resurrection. So and that's been the belief of the people for hundreds and hundreds of years, ever since Moses and coming out of Egypt and all of that. So now, here Jesus is coming with a different philosophy. Yet he's still saying he is the Messiah, although he's not boldly saying it now because it's not time for certain events to take place. He said he's trying to lay the groundwork for his people, so that his people, and that's part of what the where it says let those who hear. Where is that line? Okay, verse 9. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. That's what that's all about. Now, just like I was saying earlier too, the disciples didn't always understand because they were raised like all the other Jews were raised there. When he breaks it down and explains it to them, it's to edify them. And that's one of the edifiers, that's been one of those big words. It means to lift us up, uplifting. And so that's what these parables or little lessons are all about, to lift the people up. Did that help you at all?
Yeah, and 11 also. And he says unto them, unto you it is given to know the mystery of the kingdom of God, but unto them that are without, all these things are done in parable.
Mm-hmm.
So I say that as I'm doing this, I'm giving this information, I'm giving to you in code.
And another way, another translation, which is the easy English translation, makes it even simpler because you can, if you read 11, it says, I think I'm right, verse 11 in the easy English says, God has let you understand how he rules his people. Jesus replied, but the other people listen to stories. And then verse 12 says, this is so that they are looking and looking, but they do not see. They are listening and listening, but they do not understand. If they did understand, they would obey God. And if they did obey God, he would forgive them. So that makes it plainer.
That makes so much more sense.
So what? You need a living Bible says the same thing. You have a phone
Yeah, at home.
that you can download a Bible on.
Yes.
Okay, a good one is the one what I was just reading. It has several translations. Is My Sword. I think it is. When you go on the store, you can look for a Bible. Look for the one, I think it's My Sword, SWORD. And what that is a bunch of different translations. So like when the person is reading from, that's the most difficult to understand. But you can take your phone and do just like I just did, and go to the Easy English or the Living Bible, who talks just like us, and read that same verse, and it opens it up so much clearer. It's, oh, that's what that, just those these and thousands. Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay. And some of the great verses that we remember we can find in Mark. One of them is chapter 8, verse 36. I love that one. 36. What good is it for a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul? That also is in part of the teaching where Jesus is now beginning to predict his death. Other things that were before that or in these verses, it talks about being clean and unclean. It talks about the healing of the blind man at Bethsaida, Jesus feeding the 4,000, and Peter's confession to Christ. Now, let's talk a little bit about the church that was founded by, well, actually, no, before I do that, remember I told you that he traveled with Barnabas, and I don't know if you all remember those stories completely, but I just want to touch on them a little bit so that you can see the different places he went to. And again, also, if you remember when Peter was imprisoned, Mark was in the town. Mark stayed there with him and looked after him. And also, he was at the house. His mother's name was Mary, and he was at that house where they gathered to have church. So he was home when Peter was in jail, and then Peter was set free by the angels. And a little further down, let's see.
Where you at?
I want to talk a little bit. I want to talk about chapter 13. Because Herod died, and that changed some things. One other thing, too, before I go on. I was saying how the Sanhedrin ruled the Jews. Well, the Roman governor was had more authority over the Sanhedrin because the Jews were a part of the Roman Empire. They were conquered by the Roman Empire. So the Roman governor allowed the Sanhedrin to handle the regular, normal, everyday Jewish things. But they couldn't kill anybody. When it came to killing, they had to go to the Roman governor and had to get his permission to kill him. And then, of course, the governor is responsible to Rome. So that's the kind of breakdown. Because that becomes important at the crucifixion. And well, how well do you know that story? Or are you very familiar with that story?
There believes that Jews kill Rome. You describe the people who disagree with it. Sidetrack. Who were the other two people who were on the cross?
Barabbas was one of them. I don't remember the other guy's name. But to the point that I was making about the political power structure, on Passover, on Palm Sunday, what we call Palm Sunday, Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. Well, it just so happened that in the Old Testament, the whole description of how Jesus would send one of his disciples to this place with his donkey and a mule, I think it was, and that he would come back and ride into the city on that animal. So that was part of the fulfillment of the prophecy about Christ coming. The other thing is that there were a lot of Jews who believed that when the Messiah came, he would come and conquer. He would be a conquering Messiah. So he would come in and he would conquer the Romans, and the Jews would be set free and they would rule the world. And since this man coming in on a donkey is claiming to be Jesus the Messiah, a lot of people turned away from Jesus at that point. So now he comes into the city. They put down palms. That's why we call it Palm Sunday. And he has one of the disciples go and prepare a house for them for their Passover meal. And at that Passover meal, Jesus tells them that during the Last Supper that one of them is going to betray him, and that was Judas. Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. That was Judas. So Judas goes to tell. He's already made a deal with the Sanhedrin to give Jesus up for 30 pieces of silver. So he goes to tell them. Jesus and the disciples go to the Garden of Gethsemane where they're going to pray after they've had their meal and everything. And there are some important little nuances in there about the disciples staying away. But at any rate, just to move the story along, Judas comes in and kisses Jesus on the cheek. That was a sign that this is the man that you want. And he comes in with the soldiers, the Roman soldiers. So they take Jesus and they go. And they bring him before the Sanhedrin where the Pharisees and Sadducees and the crowd of people that are around are there, and they start bringing witnesses against Jesus that say that he blasphemed. He said that he could forgive sin. Only God could forgive sin as far as the Jews were concerned. He was doing miracles on Sunday. He didn't have his people fast, and he didn't baptize everybody. And anyway, they just had all kinds of things, and they had some trumped up things. The decision of the Sanhedrin was that he was guilty and that he should be killed. So now they got to take him to the Roman governor, and the Roman governor has to pass sentencing on him. So they go to Pontius Pilate, who is the Roman governor, and so Pontius Pilate hears the case. He speaks to Jesus one-on-one, and he tells him he finds this man innocent. I don't see what he's guilty of. But the people continue to insist because the Pharisees and have people in the crowd screaming, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" And there was a law that said you could substitute one person to be killed for another. And so that was the question was asked: do you want to do you want to free Barabbas and allow him to live and kill this man Jesus? And that was the answer. So that's how the crucifixion came about. Jesus had to carry his cross to Golgotha. Is that the right one?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And that's where he was crucified. Again, there were some other things that happened that were prophesied, and they did happen as prophesied. And Jesus commended his spirit to God. There was a guy from the Sanhedrin, who was one of the Pharisees. He had a grave that his family owned, and he offered it to the disciples to place Jesus in. I was trying to remember his name.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Nicodemus.
No, what was his name? I don't remember.
He was the one, yeah, it was
Nick.com.
Yeah, I believe it was Nicodemus. Yeah, I believe so.
Nicodemus is the one that came by night.
Right, but he finally believed, and
And what I'm going to do is, Pastor, I don't know where Pastor is tonight, Pastor Greer, is going to be, I'm going to have him do a new convert class so that he can break things down and answer his questions. Because there's going to be somebody, I think y'all have somebody that recently was converted, right? Got saved at your house? They keep saying he's coming and he don't come. But anyway, I'm going to have him to do a new convert class, because there's
Oh.
so many questions
Talking
that
about Alex,
that
I can't get
you're
him to
gonna
get me.
have. I mean, I know you know the word from the Catholic standpoint, but it's different. So I'm gonna have Pastor Greer do a new convert class, and that way, you can understand better, he can explain to you, better than that. I wish he was here tonight, because I know they're gonna be going out witnessing, and they're gonna be bringing in more people, so he's gonna need to do that class, and then you won't have to stop and do the basics he'll already have, so, and it'll be better for you. I want you to stay.
So to wrap this story up, to try to be a little quick about it, they exchanged Barabbas for Jesus. Jesus was crucified. They put him in this tomb with this rock that takes a bunch of people to move. It's hundreds of pounds, and they cover the entrance to the tomb. Well, the next morning, Mary and several of the women who traveled with Jesus and his disciples go to the tomb to wash the body, prepare the body the way the Jewish people prepared the body for when they died. Excuse me. Well, the stone had been rolled away, and two men were standing inside, and Jesus' burial cloth was folded and laid on the slab where he was supposed to be. They were two angels, and they told him that Jesus had been risen, he was resurrected. And so they told them to go back and tell the other disciples, let them know. And Jesus appeared to them, and also to several others, many different times in the weeks and months to come. And that's where he also expressed to them that he would send a comforter. A comforter would be the Holy Spirit. And that's what happened at the day of Pentecost. The Holy Spirit came. So that's basically the crucifixion and resurrection story, which is in all four of the Gospels, yes.
Dr. Mary, the man who gave the tomb is Joseph Arimathea.
Yes,
Yeah.
Joseph and Arimathea, that's right.
That's right.
That's who won the tomb.
Yeah,
Joseph and Arimathea.
He was a rich man.
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you.
Carl's at work.
Huh?
Carl's at work.
That was, with Mark having this conversation, okay, the gospel that we're reading, St. Mark, when is this actually happening? Where in the timeline, when he's speaking, where in the timeline is this happening with this?
You told us when you first started out last conference.
The time that, of what now?
Mark, when was this happening?
Oh, the period that Mark was
The day was a Sabbath, it's a Saturday. Is that what you're asking?
No, so within the story of Jesus and his life, and I understand Mark and all the other people who traveled with Jesus all seen things at different, they witnessed his life and they wrote about it. That I understand, but at what part is this? I know this is before his death.
Yeah, Mark, well,
Okay, let me see if any of this will help. Jesus began his ministry in AD 26.
that's the question, yeah.
Jesus' death, resurrection, and ascension was AD 30. Okay. Now, the book of Mark wasn't written until AD 55. So the way stories, the way people conveyed information and prior to writing was storytellers. So that's where all those information came from that was written, was from storytellers telling the stories. And it was like, I mentioned last week also, when Rome made roads, all all over their territory, it made it easier to get around. But before there were horses and all that, and wagons and all, that's where marathon runners came in at. You know, that's where we get the 26-mile marathon, because there were runners in every town, not every town, but majority of towns, so that they would run to this place and give the message, and the next person would run 26 miles and give the message, and the next person would run 20, so that's how the word got around. Storytellers were just simply people who memorized this story as it was told to them, and passed on. As they die, that story is passed on to the next person. And it's they usually kept it in one family. So until people started writing it down, because we came up with, the world came up with alphabet and paper and stuff like that. And then printing machines, because I think the Bible you have there, King James, it was not written until it was 600 years ago. So it was 1600 maybe?
But I remember looking up King James, because my question was, why is it his version supposed to be the official version when there's so many other versions?
Okay. It's not necessarily the official version, it's been around long. It was the first English translation. That's,
Wasn't it originally in Latin or Greek?
yeah. And so, we're getting off, but here's the thing about that. That's why they had the Council of Nicaea. Was to get some things, okay, this is the way it should be, this is the way it's going to be, this is what we are going to follow, this is our doctrine. I know you're a Catholic, I don't know how much of the history you're aware of, but the Catholic Church dictated what people were supposed to think and believe. The Catholic Church educated their priests and cardinals and sent them out into villages to educate the people. Before there was a written word, before there was a written Bible, people would be lucky to have 2 or 3 pages from the Bible that was written. So the priest in his community would tell the people whatever he wanted to tell them. They were corrupt. So they tell them what they wanted to tell them. They would get money from them for tithes and for all kinds of stuff, and they would live rich and high off the hog. But they would keep the people in the dark, yeah, because they didn't have a Bible. So anyway, as time passes, the printing press came to be. So that made it easier to make more copies faster and to get the word out there. So people began to recognize that a lot of the stuff these priests are telling us is a bunch of bull. And so that led to the Protestant church breaking away from the Catholic Church. And so that the Protestant church is like our Baptist, Methodist, Episcopalian, all those they protested what the Catholic Church was teaching.
Now, let me just stick this in. If I was up there teaching, I could have told you all that. Deacon Walter is a historian, and so he digs, and he got up in the information that he has. That's why I use him so much. And when I don't understand something that's going on, I run to him, because he done dug it up, and if he hasn't, he will. So everybody was not ready. Am I right? Y'all agree that everybody wouldn't have been able to answer your questions tonight like he did. So don't expect us to do that. That's all I'm telling you.
Yeah. 1611 was the date you were looking for.
Yes.
In the original King James.
That's exactly right. 1611. In fact,
King James
they
edited the first
celebrated-
Bible.
Yeah. Okay. That was our first English translation.
The first collective 66 books together.
Okay, and now to wrap brought this up. We remember that the church at Alexandria was an Egyptian church, and that was what Mark started. Mark started. A reference that kind of reminds us of this is when in the introductory chapter of Luke, Luke begins by saying he's writing this letter to Theophilus. Well, guess what? Theophilus is now running the Church of Alexandria, which was Mark's church. And I might also add, just like there were popes with the Catholic Church, the Coptic Church also had popes. And then some of their more famous people, Greek and Roman, were Clement, Didymus, who was a famous historian, and the Egyptian Origen, who was the father of theology for that area. Well, Mark, I'm going to read this because I don't want to screw it up. The pagans in the towns where Mark taught and preached and made his church, they disliked him and they persecuted Mark and his believers. And they wanted to kill Mark. When we found out about this, he went away for 2 years. But then, and that's where all these other names that I mentioned, that's where they came into authority in the church. Well, Mark came back, and they grabbed him, the pagans. They grabbed him, they went around his neck, and rode around town with his body just being ripped apart. Eventually, there was nothing but his head. And the believers, the Church of Alexandria, they took the head, preserved it, and it still is there today. Because he was the founder of the church. But that's how he met his death. And that speaks to, as I mentioned in the beginning, about persecution. Mark addresses and speaks to a lot of persecution issues, about how we should turn the other cheek, and that Christ died for us, and that we should have enough of a commitment to die for our fellow man. That was you'll find that all but one of the disciples was crucified because they met persecution from man, and that's how Mark met his end. That's all I have. Mark, if you all have any questions or any
I
comments?
have, this Bible is Oral Roberts, and he has a personal commentary in here.
Mm-hmm.
And Mark, his personal word about Mark, can I read it?
Yes, please.
It says, the book of Mark excites me to action with my faith. This is Oral Roberts. He opens his very first chapter with a vivid account of Jesus performing miracles and showing his power even over demons. To Mark, Jesus was the wonder-working Son of the living God. It is believed that Mark, who first traveled with Paul, then later with Peter, wrote mostly to impress the Romans, the rulers of the world. They controlled the armies and worship, world military and political power. They only respected power. Any sign of weakness caused them to despise anyone who was weak. Mark, although not one of the original 12 apostles, had seen Jesus at work in wonders so dazzling that it exceeded all human power put together. Early in Mark's Gospel, Jesus is seen stilling the storm-tossed waves of the raging Sea of Galilee. Rome and the Gentile world, with all their vaunted powers, could not do that, let alone heal an incurable disease, cast out a legion of demons, or with a single word drive out the money changers from the temple. The Gentile world, represented by Rome, loves power, but here is a man who, without military power, could change the demoniac into a gentle father, restoring him to his family, cast 7 demons out of the town harlot, and make her so whiter than snow, cleanse lepers who were cast out of the cities, and transform a hardened criminal in the dying moments of his life. And he could conquer even death itself and proclaim, because I live, ye shall live also. And then he said in 1947, I got so excited about Mark's account of Jesus' miracle-working power, I cried, Jesus, Jesus, send me in your name, and I too will bring your deliverance to people. And he did. And a lot of action in my ministry came from what Mark showed me of Jesus in action. Read Mark and feel yourself getting on fire and your faith rising to